Hello and welcome back to another evening of shared stories and long nights. Tonight we're doing something a little different. We're going to walk through the entire timeline of The Walking Dead, from the very first moments of the outbreak, all the way through the spin-offs that carried the story forward. The main show ran for 11 seasons. It spawned 3 major spin-off series, and its in-universe timeline stretches across roughly 13 years of apocalypse. So there is a lot of ground to cover, and we're going to take our time with it. If you're here to drift off, you're in the right place. This one's going to go on for a while. And if you like what I do here and want a way to support the channel, consider subscribing down below. But for now, get comfortable, settle in, and let's begin at the beginning. Before Rick Grimes, before the Walkers, before everything fell apart, the Walking Dead universe is set in a version of our world where a virus quietly changed everything. In the show's timeline, the outbreak began in the year 2010. Now, the show never sat you down and said, hey, here's exactly where this virus came from. For years, that was one of the biggest mysteries of the franchise. But through later spin-off shows, particularly The Walking Dead World Beyond and Daryl Dixon, we eventually got the answer. The virus originated from a biomedical research facility in France called La Biomédecine DDMI. It was created there, likely as part of an experimental program, and it got out. The United States Centre for Disease Control discovered the virus on April 16, 2010, and classified the study as Wildfire MSB 3417. For months it quietly spread through airborne transmission, infecting most of the human population without anyone realising. People carried it with no symptoms at all. The virus just sat dormant in the body, doing nothing, waiting. And then on August 25th, 2010, things reached a tipping point. The CDC declared wildfire a global pandemic. Within 2 days, the standard mortality rate started reanimating. People who had died of natural causes, car accidents, heart attacks, anything at all, they were getting back up, and they were attacking the living. Society collapsed in roughly 2 weeks. That's it. 2 weeks to go from the world we know to something unrecognisable. Military safe zones were set up, and then overrun. Emergency services were overwhelmed. Communication networks went dark. Governments crumbled, and the dead just kept rising. Now here is the thing about the wildfire virus that makes it so terrifying. It's not the bite that infects you. Everyone is already infected. Every single living person on Earth carries the virus. If you die, for any reason, and your brain is intact, you come back. You reanimate as a walker. A bite from a walker doesn't give you the virus. It gives you a secondary infection called necrosepsis, which is basically a death sentence. The fever sets in, your organs fail, and you die within about 48 hours. And then, of course, you come back as one of them. The only way to stop it is to destroy the brain. That is the world we're stepping into. And right in the middle of all of this collapse, in a small hospital in King County, Georgia, a man named Rick Grimes was lying unconscious in a hospital bed, completely unaware that the world outside his window had ended. Before the outbreak, Rick was a sheriff's deputy. Just a regular guy, really, married to a woman named Laurie. They had a son named Carl, and like a lot of marriages, theirs was strained. They'd been fighting. Laurie had accused him in front of Carl of not caring about his family. It was one of those fights that sticks with you, the kind where you say something you maybe don't fully mean, but can't take back. Rick's partner and best friend was a man named Shane Walsh. The two of them were as close as brothers. They ate lunch together in their cruiser, talked about life, women, relationships. Shane was the person Rick trusted most in the world, outside of his family. One afternoon, a routine day turned into the worst day of Rick's life. A high-speed pursuit came over the radio. 2 armed suspects in a vehicle, cops in pursuit. Rick and Shane rushed to the scene, along with their colleagues Lambert Kendall and Leon Bassett. They set up a spike strip across the road and waited. The car came screaming around the corner, hit the strip, blew its tyres, and flipped off the road into a field. Rick approached the overturned vehicle carefully. A man crawled out and immediately started shooting. Rick got hit in the chest, but his bulletproof vest saved him. He told Shane not to tell Laurie. A second gunman emerged with a shotgun and was taken down. But a third man, unnoticed by everyone, crawled out through the grass and shot Rick in the side, right where his vest didn't cover. Rick went down. Shane killed the third gunman and screamed for an ambulance, but Rick was out cold. And just like that, Rick Grimes fell into a coma. The world kept turning without him. Shane brought flowers to the hospital. Laurie and Carl waited and hoped. Days passed, then weeks, then the outbreak happened. Here is where it gets really tragic. During the early chaos of the collapse, Shane went to the hospital to get Rick. Army personnel were evacuating staff and executing infected patients in the hallways. Nurses were screaming and running past. It was pure chaos. Shane got to Rick's room and tried to move him, but Rick was hooked up to machines, tubes everywhere, completely unresponsive. Shane put his ear to Rick's chest and heard nothing. No heartbeat, or at least he couldn't hear one over the gunfire and screaming. He made the agonizing decision to leave. But before he did, he barricaded Rick's hospital door with a gurney. That small act probably saved Rick's life. Shane went back to Laurie and Carl. He told them Rick was gone. And in the weeks that followed, as society crumbled and survival became the only priority, Shane became their protector. He led them, and a small group of survivors, to a quarry outside Atlanta, where they set up camp. And somewhere in that blur of grief and fear and desperation, Shane and Laurie started a relationship. She thought her husband was dead. He'd been in love with her for longer than anyone knew. It was messy and complicated, and very human. Meanwhile, Rick lay alone in that hospital room. The power went out. The machine stopped beeping. The flowers on his bedside table wilted and died. The clock on the wall froze. And then one day, Rick woke up. He was weak, dehydrated, confused. He pulled himself out of bed and collapsed on the floor. He called out for a nurse, but nobody came. He dragged himself to the bathroom and drank water straight from the tap. Then he opened the door to his room and stepped into a hallway that looked like a war zone. Flickering lights, wires hanging from the ceiling, bullet holes in the walls, dried blood everywhere. He stumbled to the nurse's station and picked up the phone. Dead. He found a book of matches and kept moving. Then he saw it, a set of double doors leading to the cafeteria, chained shut from the outside. Someone had painted a message across them in big black letters. Don't open, dead inside. Through the crack in the doors, grey fingers were reaching out, grasping and clawing, moaning. Rick backed away. He tried the elevator. Dead. He found a stairwell and pushed through a heavy door into pitch darkness that reeked of rotting flesh. Lighting matches one at a time, he stumbled down the stairs until he found an exit. The door opened to the loading bay at the back of the hospital, and when his eyes adjusted to the sunlight, Rick saw rows and rows of bodies wrapped in sheets, stacked in piles, covered in flies, hundreds of them. He left the hospital and stumbled up a hill. There was an abandoned military helicopter, sandbags, signs of a military operation that had been completely abandoned. Whatever had happened, whatever Rick had slept through, it was over. And whoever was supposed to save people had given up. I think about this scene a lot because it's one of the most effective openings in television history. We, the audience, already know what happened. We know about the walkers, the collapse, all of it, but Rick doesn't. He's experiencing the end of the world as a series of clues, empty hallways, dead phones, body bags, and the slow, sickening realization that he is completely alone. Rick found a bicycle near a park and started riding. On the ground nearby was the upper half of a woman, her legs missing, her face decayed. She reached for him, moaning. He rode away. He made his way home. The front door was open. The house was empty. Laurie and Carl were gone. Rick sat on the floor of his living room and sobbed, calling out their names, questioning whether any of this was real. Outside, he spotted a figure stumbling down the street and waved to get their attention. Before he could process what was happening, a young boy crept up behind him and hit him in the head with a shovel. Rick went down. He woke up tied to a bed. The boy Dwayne stood guard with a baseball bat, and then his father walked in. A man named Morgan Jones. Morgan was cautious, suspicious at first. He demanded to know if Rick had been bitten. Rick showed him his bandaged side and explained he'd been shot, not bitten. Morgan relaxed enough to untie him, but warned Rick that if he tried anything, he'd kill him. Over dinner, Morgan explained what had happened to the world. The dead were coming back. A bite or a scratch from one of them would kill you, and then you'd come back as one of them too. The fever burned you out. You died, and then you got back up. This was just how things were now. Morgan's wife had turned. She was out there, among the walkers that shuffled through the neighbourhood at night. Morgan could see her sometimes, standing in the street, drawn to the house by some fading memory. He couldn't bring himself to shoot her. That detail, such a small thing in the grand scope of the apocalypse, tells you everything you need to know about the world these characters are living in. It's not the walkers that will break you. It's what they used to be. It's the people you loved wearing faces that don't belong to them anymore. Rick told Morgan he was going to Atlanta. The CDC was there, and so, he hoped, was some kind of answer. Maybe even his family. Morgan warned him it was too dangerous. The cities had fallen first and fallen hardest, but Rick was determined. He gathered weapons from the King County Sheriff's Department, gave Morgan a walkie-talkie, and told him he'd reach out every day at dawn on Channel 1. Before leaving, Rick did something that still gets me. He walked back to the park, where he'd found that crawling woman, the one with no legs, dragging herself across the grass, and he knelt down and said he was sorry this had happened to her. Then he shot her in the head. A small mercy. The first of many choices Rick would have to make about who lives, who dies, and what the people in between still deserve. Rick drove towards Atlanta in a police cruiser, and for a moment it almost felt like the old world. A cop, a car, a road ahead. But the old world was gone, and what was waiting for him in Atlanta would nearly kill him before his story even really began. Rick ran out of gas on the outskirts of the city. He found a farmhouse, took a horse, and rode into Atlanta like something out of a western. The streets were abandoned. Cars piled up, overturned, burned out, paper and trash blowing in the wind. And then he turned a corner and saw them. Hundreds of walkers packed into the streets, a massive herd just standing there in the Georgia heat. The horse panicked. Rick was thrown. The walkers swarmed. He crawled under a tank and squeezed inside through the hatch. A dead soldier was slumped in the corner. Rick grabbed his pistol, and the soldier moved. Walker. Rick shot it, but inside the tank the gunshot was deafening. He was disoriented, ears ringing, completely trapped, surrounded by walkers on all sides banging on the metal. Rick put the gun to his own head. He was ready to end it right there. And then a voice crackled over the tank's radio. "Hey you, dumbass. Yeah, you in the tank. Cozy in there." That voice belonged to a young man named Glenn. And that moment, that one bit of static and sarcasm cutting through the worst day of Rick's life, is where the story of The Walking Dead truly begins. Glenn talked Rick out of the tank and through the streets. They ran for an alleyway, climbed a ladder, and met up with a small group of survivors who had come into the city on a supply run. Among them were Andrea, a woman who had lost nearly everything and was holding on by a thread. T-Dog, a quiet and dependable man. Jacqui, who would soon make one of the most heartbreaking decisions in the show. Morales, a family man. And Merle Dixon, Daryl's older brother, who was loud, aggressive, and openly racist toward T-Dog and others in the group. Merle was causing so much trouble on that rooftop in Atlanta that Rick handcuffed him to a pipe to keep the peace. It was supposed to be temporary, but in the chaos of their escape, T-Dog dropped the key down a drain. They left Merle behind on that rooftop, handcuffed in the sun, surrounded by a city of the dead. Glenn led them out of the city, and when they got back to the quarry camp on the outskirts of town, something happened that Rick had stopped believing was possible. Laurie was there, Carl was there. They ran to him. His wife, his son, alive. Shane was there too, of course, and in his eyes you could see the exact moment that everything he had built since the outbreak, his role as leader, as protector, as the man standing next to Laurie, all of it started to crumble. Rick was back. The dead man was alive, and nothing was going to be the same. The quarry camp wasn't much, a collection of tents around an RV, kept watch by a man named Dale who spent most of his time on the roof, scanning the tree line through binoculars. But it was community, people cooking together, kids playing, stories around the fire. For a brief moment, it felt almost okay. That didn't last. The camp was attacked by walkers one night. It came fast and brutal. Ed Pelletier, Carol's abusive husband, was killed. Amy, Andrea's younger sister, was bitten and died in Andrea's arms. Several other survivors were lost. The group was shaken to the core, and a man named Jim had been bitten during the attack. He knew what was coming. The fever, the turn. He asked the group to leave him by a tree on the side of the road. They did. They carried him there, said their goodbyes, and drove away. Another small mercy in a world that offered very few. Rick decided the group should head for the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. If anyone had answers about what was happening, it would be the scientists there. The drive was tense, nobody knew what they'd find, and when they arrived, the building was locked up tight, surrounded by hundreds of bodies on the ground. The place looked completely dead. Rick hammered on the metal shutters and screamed to be let in. Walkers were closing in. Shane wanted to leave. Andrea pointed out they had no gas and no food. They wouldn't make it anywhere else. And then, just as hope was about to run out, Rick spotted a security camera move. Someone was watching them. He slammed his fists against the shutters and screamed. The shutters opened, flooding them in white light. Inside the CDC, they met Dr. Edwin Jenner. He was the last scientist left. Everyone else had either fled or chosen to stay and die when things fell apart. Jenner was alone, running experiments on tissue samples, talking into a video camera every day, like a man keeping a diary for a world that would never read it. He took blood samples, showed them around, and for one night, the group got to feel human again. Hot showers, wine with dinner, clean clothes. Glenn got drunk. Carl tried a sip of red wine and hated it. It was the closest thing to normalcy they'd experienced since the world ended. But Jenner was keeping secrets. The next morning, he revealed what he'd learned about the virus. He showed them a brain scan of a test subject, his own wife, who'd been bitten and volunteered to let him document the process. They watched as the virus shut down her brain, darkened everything, and then reignited just the brainstem. The most primitive part. No memory, no personality, no consciousness, just hunger and movement. That was all the walkers were, reactivated brainstems trapped in a dead body. And then came the reveal that changed everything. Jenner told Rick quietly and away from the others that everyone was already infected. It didn't matter if you were bitten or not. When you die, you come back, everyone. The virus was airborne. It was already inside all of them. On top of that, the building was running out of power. When the generators died, the CDC's safety protocol would kick in. A system called HIT, a high-impulse thermobaric fuel-air explosive. The entire building would be incinerated, destroying every virus sample and pathogen stored inside to prevent them from getting out. Jenner had no intention of leaving. He'd been counting down the days, waiting for the end, and he was planning to take the group with him. The countdown began. Jenner locked the doors. The group panicked. Rick pleaded with him to let them go. Jenner hesitated, then unlocked the doors. whispering something into Rick's ear that we wouldn't learn about until later. Everyone ran, except Jackie, who chose to stay with Jenna. She took his hand, and they waited together. Andrea almost stayed too, but Dale refused to leave without her. He told her that if she was going to die in that building, then so was he. Andrea relented. They ran for the exit. The group piled into their vehicles and drove away from the CDC just as the building erupted in a massive fireball behind them. Black smoke rising into the sky. Whatever answers the CDC might have held were gone. Whatever hope the French scientists had been close to, the ones Jenna mentioned had sent a promising transmission before going silent. That was a thread that wouldn't be picked up again for years. The caravan drove away from the smouldering ruins. They had no destination, no plan, no answers, just each other, and a road stretching out into an empty, broken world. And that moment, with the ruins of the CDC burning behind them, marks the real beginning of the long road ahead. Because everything that came before was just the prologue. The Walking Dead was never really about the virus or the walkers or how the world ended. It was about what happens after, how people survive, who they become, and how far they'll go to protect the ones they love. With nowhere left to go, the group decided to head for Fort Benning, a military base that Shane had been pushing as a destination. Before leaving Atlanta behind, Rick tried one last time to reach Morgan on the walkie-talkie, warning him to stay away from the city. Then they hit the road. They didn't make it far. On a stretch of highway clogged with abandoned cars, the RV broke down again. While they were scavenging for parts and supplies, a massive herd of walkers came shambling through. The group hid under cars, holding their breath, pressing themselves against the asphalt. Most of them made it through, but Sophia, Carol's 12-year-old daughter, panicked and ran into the woods, with 2 walkers chasing her. Rick went after her. He found her hiding near a creek bed, told her to stay put while he drew the walkers away, and then came back for her. But when he returned, she was gone. The search for Sophia became the defining mission of the group for weeks. Daryl in particular threw himself into it. He was relentless, riding off alone into the woods, following tracks, nearly dying after a fall into a ravine where one of his own crossbow bolts went through his side. He even hallucinated his brother Merle taunting him, telling him nobody in the group cared about him and that he was wasting his time. Daryl crawled out of that ravine, killed the walkers that came for him, and kept searching. It was the first time we really saw who Daryl Dixon was underneath all that roughness. Not just a survivor, but someone who cared deeply, even if he didn't know how to say it. During this same stretch, Carl was accidentally shot by a man named Otis while he was watching a deer in a clearing. The bullet passed through the deer and hit Carl in the abdomen. Rick carried his bleeding son through the woods until they reached a farmhouse owned by a veterinarian named Herschel Green. Herschel operated on Carl and saved his life, but it required surgical supplies from a nearby FEMA station that was overrun with walkers. Shane and Otis went on that run together. They got the supplies, but on the way out, walkers closed in. They were both injured, slowing each other down, and there weren't enough bullets to fight through. Shane made a choice that would define his character for the rest of his arc. He shot Otis in the leg and left him as bait so the walkers would feed on Otis while Shane escaped with the medical supplies. He went back to the farm, shaved his head to hide the patch of hair Otis had torn out during their struggle, and told everyone that Otis had sacrificed himself to save Carl. Nobody believed Shane's story. Not really. Dale saw through it almost immediately. Laurie suspected it, but Carl was alive and the supplies had arrived, and people chose not to look too closely at the cost. That's one of the things The Walking Dead does so well. It doesn't just show you the terrible choice, it shows you how everyone around that choice either confronts it or looks away. Herschel's farm became the group's temporary home. For a few weeks it felt almost peaceful. The Green family was kind if guarded. Maggie, Herschel's eldest daughter, and Glenn started falling for each other. It was sweet and awkward and very real. Two people finding something tender in the middle of absolute horror. Daryl kept searching for Sophia, Carol prayed, and the group slowly started to fracture along a fault line that had been forming since the quarry. Shane on one side, wanting to make hard choices and take control. Rick on the other, trying to hold on to something resembling morality. But Herschel had a secret. His barn was full of walkers. He'd been keeping them, his wife, his neighbours, people he'd known, because he believed they were sick, not dead. He couldn't accept that the people he loved were gone. He kept feeding them chickens through the barn doors and waiting for a cure that was never coming. When the group found out about the barn, Shane lost it. He broke the locks, threw open the doors, and the walkers came filing out one by one. Shane, Andrea, T-Dog and Daryl started shooting them down as the Green family watched in horror. Herschel fell to his knees. This was his wife. These were his neighbours, and they were being executed in front of him. Then the last walker stepped out of the barn. A small figure, pale skin, a blue rainbow t-shirt. It was Sophia. Carol screamed. Daryl caught her and held her back. Nobody could move. Even Shane, who had been in a furious rage moments earlier, stood frozen. It was Rick who stepped forward, drew his pistol, and shot her. One bullet, clean. The search was over. Sophia had been in the barn the whole time. That moment broke something in the group that never fully healed. Carol was devastated. Daryl pulled away from everyone. Herschel disappeared to a bar in town and started drinking. Beth, Herschel's younger daughter, went into a kind of shock and later attempted to hurt herself. And the rift between Rick and Shane widened into something that couldn't be bridged. The tension between Rick and Shane had been building from the moment Rick came back from the dead, so to speak. Shane believed he was the better leader. He believed Rick's mercy and hesitation were going to get people killed. And in some ways, he wasn't wrong. Shane saw the world as it was and acted accordingly. But he also crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Killing Otis, manipulating Laurie, planning to kill Rick to take his family. It came to a head one night. Shane lured Rick out into a field under the pretense of searching for a prisoner who had escaped. There was no escape. Shane had killed the prisoner himself and staged the whole thing. Out in the moonlit field, Shane drew his weapon and told Rick that he was a better father, a better protector, and that Rick coming back had ruined everything. Rick seemed to surrender. He put his hands up, appeared to offer Shane his gun, and then, in one swift motion, Rick pulled a knife and drove it into Shane's chest. Shane stumbled, fell. Rick held him as he died, weeping, telling him he'd brought this on himself. It's a brutal scene, but also deeply sad. These were best friends, brothers really, and the world had turned them into enemies. As Rick knelt over Shane's body, trying to process what he'd done, Carl appeared from the darkness. And behind Rick, Shane's body reanimated. Shane got back up, dead-eyed and snarling, and before Rick could react, Carl raised his gun and shot Walker Shane in the head. A 12-year-old boy shooting the reanimated corpse of his father's best friend. That's the world these people live in, and it was only going to get harder. The gunshot drew a massive herd. Thousands of walkers, a supergroup that had been building for days, converged on Herschel's farm. The group fought desperately. They used cars and guns and fire, but there were too many. The barn burned, the fences fell, the farm was lost, the group scattered into the night. They found each other on the highway the next morning, bruised and shaken, and Rick, exhausted and at the end of his rope, told them the truth. He told them what Jenna had whispered to him at the CDC. We're all infected. No matter how we die, we come back. Every single one of us. And then Rick said something that drew a line under everything that had happened and everything that was coming. He looked at the group and told them that this wasn't a democracy anymore. If they wanted to stay, they'd follow his lead. If they didn't, they could leave. Nobody left. Several months passed. Winter came and went. The group moved constantly, clearing houses, sleeping in shifts, eating what they could find. Laurie was visibly pregnant. Carl was harder, colder, growing up too fast. And Herschel, who had lost his farm and his illusions, had somehow found a quiet strength that made him one of Rick's most trusted advisors. They found the prison in early 2012, roughly a year and a half into the apocalypse. It sat there behind tall fences, topped with razor wire, surrounded by fields. And it was full of walkers. But it had walls, it had cells with doors that locked. It had space. For a group that had been sleeping in the dirt for months, it looked like salvation. Rick led the group through the outer yard first, drawing walkers to the fence while others picked them off from the guard towers. Then they cleared the interior, cell block by cell block, fighting through walkers in riot gear, whose helmets made headshots nearly impossible, until Maggie figured out you could stab up under the chin. They secured cell block C, and for the first time in months, people had rooms, beds, a roof that didn't leak. Laurie confided in Herschel that she was terrified the baby would be stillborn, or worse, born as a walker. She feared Rick and Carl hated her. She made Herschel promise that if she and the baby both died during childbirth, he wouldn't hesitate. He would put them both down before they could turn. Elsewhere, we were introduced to Michonne. She showed up out of nowhere, two jawless, armless walkers chained to her like pack mules, carrying Andrea through the Georgia woods. Andrea was sick with the flu and barely able to walk. Michonne was silent, fierce, and completely self-sufficient. She had survived alone for months by using those chained walkers as camouflage. The smell of the dead masked her scent. Other walkers simply walked past her like she was one of them. It was gruesome and brilliant. The prison brought new threats. A group of surviving inmates had been locked in the cafeteria since the outbreak began. Among them was a man named Thomas, who was violent and unhinged, and another named Axel, who was mostly harmless. Rick struck a deal with them. They could have their own cell block, but they stayed separate. When Thomas tried to kill Rick during a walker clearing operation, Rick put a machete through his skull without a second's hesitation. And then came the birth. Laurie went into labour during a walker breach. The corridors were overrun. There was no time to get to Herschel. Maggie and Carl were with her, and Maggie had to perform an emergency cesarean section right there in the boiler room. There was no anaesthetic. Laurie knew she wouldn't survive. She told Carl she loved him. She told Maggie to save the baby. The baby was born healthy, a girl, but Laurie bled out. And then Carl did the unthinkable. He stayed behind while Maggie carried the baby out. He raised his gun and shot his mother in the head to prevent her from turning. A boy 13 years old at most, ending his mother's life in a boiler room while walkers clawed at the walls outside. Rick found out when Maggie emerged carrying the baby, covered in blood. He looked at Maggie, looked at Carl, saw that Laurie wasn't with them, and collapsed. The sounds Andrew Lincoln made in that scene, that raw animal grief, are some of the most devastating moments in the entire series. Rick didn't just lose his wife, he lost whatever was left of the man he used to be. The baby was named Judith. She became the heart of the group going forward. This tiny, helpless thing that represented everything they were fighting for. A future, a reason to keep going even when keeping going felt impossible. Meanwhile, the governor had been building his own empire. His real name was Philip Blake, and he ran a walled town called Woodbury, about an hour's drive from the prison. On the surface, Woodbury looked like paradise. Green lawns, barbecues, cold drinks, people living something that resembled a normal life. The governor was charming, welcoming, and completely insane. He kept a fish tank full of severed walker heads in his private apartment, lit up and lined in a row like some kind of collection. He had his undead daughter, Penny, chained up in a closet. He brushed her hair, he talked to her, he believed she was still in there somewhere, and he was willing to do absolutely anything to protect his illusion of control. Merle Dixon was alive and serving as the governor's enforcer. He'd survived on that Atlanta rooftop by cutting off his own hand to free himself from the handcuffs, and he'd made his way to Woodbury, where the governor outfitted him with a prosthetic blade. Merle was loyal to the governor, or at least useful to him, but he'd never stopped looking for his brother Darryl. Andrea ended up at Woodbury too, separated from the group after the farm fell. She was drawn to the governor's charisma and his vision for rebuilding civilization. She genuinely believed he was a good man. It would take a lot of horror before she realised otherwise. The conflict between Rick's group and the governor escalated when Maggie and Glenn were captured on a supply run by Merle and brought to Woodbury. The governor interrogated Glenn brutally and threatened Maggie in deeply disturbing ways. Rick, Darryl and Michonne mounted a rescue mission. In the chaos, Michonne found the governor's apartment, discovered Penny, and killed her. She fought the governor, stabbing him in the eye with a shard of glass. The governor would wear an eye patch from that point forward, and his hatred for Rick's group became absolute. Merle's loyalty was torn between the governor and Darryl. Eventually, he chose his brother. The two of them left Woodbury together, and Merle came back to the prison. Nobody trusted him. Glenn especially despised him for what he'd done, but Darryl vouched for him, and Rick let him stay. The governor attacked the prison with his militia. Merle, knowing he would never be accepted by the group and wanting to do something that mattered, went on a solo mission to assassinate the governor. He got close. He killed several of the governor's men, but the governor caught him, beat him, and shot him. When Darryl found his brother later, Merle had already turned. Darryl had to put down his own brother. He stabbed him over and over, sobbing, breaking down in a way we'd never seen from him. It's one of the quietest and most devastating moments in the entire show. Andrea also died during this stretch. She tried to broker peace between Woodbury and the prison, but was captured by the governor and chained to a chair in a room with a dying man who would soon turn. She freed herself, too late. The walker had already bitten her. Michonne found her, and Andrea asked to end it herself. Michonne stayed with her, holding her hand, as Andrea put a gun to her own head. After the gunshot, Michonne emerged from the room in tears. The governor's first assault was repelled, but the damage was done. Rick took in the surviving Woodbury residents, the people the governor had abandoned and terrorized. The prison grew. It became a real community, and for a brief stretch, maybe 6 months or so, things were almost good. They had a council to make decisions, they farmed, the kids went to a makeshift school, Herschel tended to the sick, Darryl and Carol ran supply missions, Rick stepped back from leadership and started growing vegetables. It was the closest thing to peace any of them had known since the world ended. But peace in this world is always temporary, and the governor wasn't done. The peace at the prison lasted about 6 months. People settled in. They had a council that made decisions collectively. Rick had stepped back from leadership entirely and was spending his days tending crops and raising pigs. Carl was going to a little makeshift school run by Carol, who was secretly also teaching the kids how to use knives. Darryl had become the group's best hunter and was running supply missions with a rotating crew. Herschel was the community's doctor, philosopher, and moral compass, all rolled into one. But then a mysterious illness started sweeping through the cell blocks. People were getting fevers, coughing blood, and dying in the night, only to reanimate and attack their cellmates. It spread fast. The prison had to be quarantined. Herschel, brave beyond reason, sealed himself inside the infected cell block to treat the sick personally, knowing full well that one wrong cough could kill him. Carol made a decision during this outbreak that would change her standing in the group permanently. 2 people, Karen and David, showed early symptoms of the illness. Carol killed them both and burned their bodies to try to stop the infection from spreading. When Rick discovered what she'd done, he drove her out of the group. He didn't consult the council, he didn't hold a vote. He took Carol to a car, gave her some supplies and told her she couldn't come back. It was harsh, and in hindsight, Carol's logic was sound, even if her methods were extreme. but Rick felt she'd crossed a line that the group couldn't come back from. She drove away alone, and everyone else was told she'd gone on a supply run. While all this was happening, the governor was still out there. After his first attack on the prison failed, and he massacred most of his own people from Woodbury in a fit of rage, his two remaining men, Martinez and Schumpert, abandoned him in the night. The governor drifted alone for months. He burned Woodbury to the ground and wandered the roads, haggard and half dead, until he stumbled across a family living in an apartment building. Two sisters, named Lily and Tara, their father David, and Lily's young daughter Megan. The governor reinvented himself. He called himself Brian. He helped them, protected them. When their father died of lung cancer and reanimated, he put the old man down. He fell in love with Lily. He became something like a father to Megan. For a brief window, it seemed like maybe the governor could change. Maybe he could be someone different, but he couldn't. He found Martinez again, who had started running his own camp. The governor killed Martinez by beating him and feeding him to a pit of walkers. He manipulated the camp's leadership until he was in charge, and then he turned his sights back to the prison. The governor showed up at the prison gates with a tank, an army, and two hostages, Michonne and Herschel. He told Rick to surrender the prison, or he'd kill them both. Rick tried to negotiate. He gave one of the most heartfelt speeches in the show, saying they could all live together, share the prison, find a way to coexist. The governor held Michonne's katana to Herschel's neck, and Herschel, even kneeling there with a blade against his throat, smiled. Because Rick's words were proof is that the man he'd believed in was still in there. The governor brought the katana down. Not a clean stroke. It took 2 swings. Herschel was killed in front of his daughters, in front of everyone, and the war erupted. The tank smashed through the fences. Gunfire broke out everywhere. Walkers poured in through the destroyed walls. The prison, which had been their home for nearly a year, was torn apart in minutes. Maggie ran to find Glenn, who was sick in bed. Beth went looking for baby Judith. The governor and Rick fought hand to hand in the courtyard, with the governor nearly strangling Rick to death before Michonne drove her katana through the governor's chest from behind. The governor was left on the ground, dying slowly. Lily, the woman he'd been with, walked up to him and put a bullet in his head. That was the end of Philip Blake. In the chaos, Daryl destroyed the tank by dropping a grenade down the barrel. Tyrese was pinned down by gunfire until Lizzie and Mika, 2 young girls he'd been looking after, shot his attackers. Rick and Carl found Judith's baby carrier, empty and covered in blood. They believed she was dead. Carl sobbed. Rick, beaten half to death, told his son not to look back. Just keep walking. The group scattered in every direction. Beth and Daryl, Glenn and Tara, Tyrese and the girls with baby Judith, who was alive after all. Rick and Carl alone. Maggie, Sasha and Bob. Michonne on her own. Everyone separated. Everyone broken. The prison burning behind them as herds of walkers poured through the ruins. What followed was one of the most emotionally raw stretches of the show. With the group split apart, each storyline became its own little survival tale. Rick and Carl holed up in an abandoned house. Rick was so badly injured he could barely stand. Carl, furious and scared and exhausted, went out alone to scavenge. He ate an entire can of pudding on a rooftop, while a walker clawed at the window below him. It would have been funny if it weren't so sad. A kid sitting alone in the apocalypse, eating pudding, trying to feel like a normal teenager for 5 minutes. Beth and Daryl bonded in a way neither of them expected. Beth, who had always been the optimistic one, the one who sang around the campfire and wrote in her journal, pushed Daryl to open up. They burned down a moonshine shack together, a symbolic act of leaving the past behind. For the first time, Daryl talked about his childhood, his father's abuse, the scars on his back. Beth told him that he had to put it away, that who he was before didn't determine who he was now. Their connection was real and tender, and it would make what came next even harder to bear. Tyrese was left caring for baby Judith and the 2 sisters, Lizzie and Mika. They found a quiet house in a pecan grove, and for a moment it seemed like they might settle there. Mika was gentle and kind, the sort of child who couldn't bring herself to shoot a deer. Lizzie was something else entirely. She didn't understand what walkers were, or rather, she understood them differently. She thought they were just changed, not dead. She played with them, named them, fed them. One afternoon, Carol and Tyrese returned from hunting to find Lizzie standing over Mika's body with a bloody knife in her hand. She'd killed her own sister. She wanted to show them that Mika would come back, that she'd be the same. She said she was about to do the same thing to Judith. Carol talked Lizzie down, took the knife, and sent her inside. Then she and Tyrese had a conversation that is still one of the hardest scenes in the show. They both knew what had to happen. Lizzie couldn't be around other people. She was a danger to everyone, especially Judith. Carol took Lizzie outside for a walk. Lizzie sensed something was wrong. She started crying, apologizing for pointing the gun at Carol earlier. Carol told her to look at the flowers. Lizzie turned around, staring at the wild flowers swaying in the breeze. Carol pulled the trigger. They buried both girls in front of the house. And that night, Carol confessed to Tyrese that she was the one who had killed Karen and David at the prison. She handed him her gun and told him to do what he needed to do. Tyrese gripped the table, trembling with rage, and then he said he forgave her. He told her he'd never forget, but he forgave her. The two of them left the grove the next morning with Judith and walked on toward the train tracks. Signs began appearing along the railroad, hand-painted messages on walls and posts. Sanctuary for all, community for all. Those who arrive, survive, a place called Terminus. One by one, the scattered members of the group found these signs and followed them. Glenn, desperate to find Maggie, pushed hard toward Terminus with a woman named Tara, who had been with the governor's group, but now wanted to make amends. Abraham Ford, a big red-headed military man, was travelling with Rosita Espinosa and Eugene Porter. Eugene claimed he was a scientist who knew what caused the outbreak and had a mission to get to Washington, D.C., where he could fix everything. Abraham believed him with an almost religious devotion, and their mission to D.C. became his reason for living. Maggie, Sasha, and Bob found each other and headed for Terminus too. Daryl fell in with a rough group of men, led by a man named Joe, who lived by a code of claiming possessions. Daryl was uncomfortable with them, but didn't have anywhere else to go. That alliance would come to a violent end later. Everyone converged on Terminus, and at first it seemed okay. There were people grilling food. A woman named Mary welcomed them with a smile. But Rick noticed things. He saw a poncho he recognized, a watch he'd given away, a riot gear vest that belonged to someone from the prison. These people had been taking things from newcomers, and not just their belongings. Rick, Daryl, Michonne, and Carl were herded at gunpoint into a train car. Inside, they found Glenn, Maggie, Abraham, and the rest. Locked in the dark, trapped, Rick delivered one of his most chilling lines. They're going to feel pretty stupid when they find out. When someone asked what he meant, Rick said they're screwing with the wrong people. Terminus was a trap. The residents were cannibals. They hadn't always been. Mary explained that Terminus had started as a real sanctuary, but they'd been overrun by a group of marauders who raped and tortured them. After that, they made a choice. You're the butcher or you're the cattle. They chose butcher. Rick, Daryl, Glenn, and Bob were dragged to a slaughterhouse trough. Men with bats and knives were systematically knocking captives unconscious and slitting their throats. Glenn was seconds from being killed when an explosion rocked the building. That explosion was Carol. She had found Terminus on her own and saw what was happening. She covered herself in a walker guts for camouflage, shot a propane tank with a firework to blow a hole in the fences, and let the walkers pour in. In the chaos, she infiltrated Terminus, recovered Daryl's crossbow, and shot her way through. It was a one-woman assault, and it was magnificent. Rick freed himself, using a sharpened piece of wood he'd hidden in his sock, killed the two butchers, and broke the others out. The group fought through Terminus and escaped into the woods. When Carol appeared at the tree line, Daryl ran to her and hugged her tighter than he'd ever hugged anyone. Rick, who had exiled her from the group not that long ago, embraced her too. And then Carol led them to the cabin, where Tyrese was waiting with Judith. Rick's face when he saw his daughter alive is something that's hard to describe. He fell apart. He held her against his chest, and everything else in the world, Terminus, the walkers, all of it, just fell away for a moment. The group was together again, battered, traumatized, but together. They hit the road toward Washington, following Abraham's belief in Eugene's mission. Along the way, they encountered a church and a man named Father Gabriel Stokes, a priest who had survived by locking himself inside his church and letting his congregation die outside. He was consumed by guilt and nearly useless in a fight, but Rick let him join them because, well, that's what Rick did. He took in strays, Bob was bitten by a walker, and later kidnapped by a small group of surviving Terminus residents led by a man named Gareth. They'd been tracking Rick's group for revenge. When Bob woke up, Gareth was eating his leg, literally carving off pieces and cooking them over a fire. Bob started laughing. Tainted meat, he told them. Tainted meat. He'd already been bitten. He was dying. Everything they'd just eaten was infected. Rick made good on his promise to Gareth. He tracked the Terminus survivors to Gabriel's church and killed them with the machete he'd described back in the slaughterhouse. No mercy, no negotiation, just swift, brutal violence in a house of God. It was one of the moments where you could see how far Rick had come from the man who woke up in that hospital bed. Bob died shortly after, surrounded by people who cared about him. Sasha was at his side. He thanked Rick for showing him that there were still good people in the world. Then he was gone, and Tyrese put a knife through his temple to keep him from turning. The group split again. Abraham took his team toward DC with Glenn, Maggie and Tara. The rest stayed behind to wait for Daryl and Carol, who had gone after Beth. On the road to Washington, Eugene's secret came out. He wasn't a scientist. He didn't know what caused the outbreak. He didn't have a cure. He'd made the whole thing up because he knew he couldn't survive alone, and telling people he had a mission to save the world was the only way to guarantee they'd protect him. Abraham, who had built his entire post-apocalyptic identity around getting Eugene to DC, nearly beat him to death. There was no cure. There had never been a cure. Just a frightened man telling a lie that gave other frightened people something to believe in. Meanwhile, Beth was alive. She'd been taken to Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, a place run by a group of police officers led by a woman named Dawn Lerner. The hospital operated on a system of debt. They saved your life, and then you owed them labor until the debt was paid. It was a form of institutionalized control dressed up as charity. Beth fought to survive in there. She befriended a man named Noah and helped him escape. She stood up to Dawn. She was stronger than anyone at that hospital expected. Rick's group mounted a rescue mission. They captured 2 of Dawn's officers and arranged a hostage exchange. The trade went smoothly at first. Beth and another captive were exchanged. Everyone was walking away, and then Dawn demanded Noah back. Beth, quiet Beth, who used to sing around the campfire, looked Dawn in the eye and said, "I get it now." She pulled a pair of scissors from her cast and stabbed Dawn in the shoulder. Dawn's gun went off reflexively and hit Beth in the head. Daryl shot Dawn instantly. The officers stood down. The shooting stopped, but Beth was gone. Daryl carried her body out of the hospital in his arms, and when Maggie saw her little sister's body, she collapsed. She hadn't even known Beth was alive until that moment, and now she was watching Daryl carry her out, limp and lifeless. It was senseless. That's what made it so devastating. Not a heroic last stand, not a sacrifice that saved everyone, just a split-second act of defiance that ended in a bullet. The Walking Dead never let you forget that death in this world doesn't always mean something. Sometimes it's just sudden and stupid and final. The group was shattered all over again. They'd lost Beth, Bob, Herschel, the prison, and any illusion that there was a cure waiting for them at the end of the road. Rick was harder than ever, Daryl was quieter, Maggie was buried in grief, and the road ahead stretched out with no destination, no plan, and no promise that things would get better. But they kept walking. That's what they did. That's what they'd always done. And what was coming next, a place called Alexandria, would change everything one more time. The group was at its lowest point. They were travelling on foot through Virginia, exhausted, starving, barely speaking. They were being followed by a pack of wild dogs at one point. And when those dogs attacked, Sasha shot them, and the group ate them. That's where they were, eating wild dogs on the side of the road. Water appeared mysteriously in the middle of their path with a note that said, "From a friend." They were too suspicious to drink it. Eugene tried to test it by taking a sip, and Abraham slapped it out of his hand. Then the rain came, and they took shelter in a barn. That night, a herd of walkers found them. The group held the barn doors shut through the entire night, pushing against the weight of the dead, and by morning the storm had toppled trees and killed most of the walkers outside. They'd survived by literally holding the door. The next morning, a clean-cut man named Aaron approached the group. He was polite, well-dressed, and carrying photographs of a walled community in northern Virginia called Alexandria. He said he'd been watching them for weeks and wanted to invite them in. Rick punched him in the face and tied him up. This tells you everything about where Rick was mentally. A stranger shows up offering shelter, and Rick's first instinct is violence. But Aaron was patient. He explained that Alexandria had walls, houses, running water, electricity powered by solar panels. Rick was skeptical, but eventually agreed to check it out, mostly because the group was out of options. When they arrived at Alexandria, the gates opened to reveal something none of them had seen in years. Paved streets, manicured lawns, children riding bikes, people barbecuing in their backyards. It looked like the suburbs before the world ended. It was almost unsettling, actually. After everything the group had been through, normalcy felt foreign and suspicious. The community was run by a woman named Deanna Monroe, a former congresswoman from Ohio who'd been evacuated to the area early in the outbreak. Her husband, Reg, was an architect who had designed the walls. Deanna interviewed each new arrival on camera, assessing their skills and personalities. She was building a civilization, not just a survival camp. She wanted government, law, community. She saw Rick's group as the muscle and experience her sheltered community desperately needed. Rick was made constable, Michonne too. Daryl was offered no specific role and spent most of his early days in Alexandria sitting on the porch gutting possums, clearly uncomfortable in a place where people complained about their pasta makers. Carol put on an act that was genuinely incredible. She dressed in bland cardigans, baked cookies for the neighbours, and played the role of a meek, harmless housewife. In reality, she was their spy, their infiltrator, the one keeping tabs on Alexandria's weaknesses and its people. The Alexandrians were soft. Most of them had been behind those walls since the beginning of the outbreak. They'd never been out there. They'd never fought for their lives in any real way. Their supply runners were timid. Their leaders had no idea how to handle a real threat, and Rick's group saw all of this immediately. Glenn went on a supply run with a man named Nicholas, one of Alexandria's more established residents. Nicholas was a coward who got people killed through panic and incompetence, including a young man named Noah, who had escaped Grady Memorial with Beth's help and had only just arrived in Alexandria. Noah was crushed to death by walkers in a revolving door while Nicholas fled. Glenn could have killed Nicholas for it, maybe should have, but Glenn was Glenn. He believed in giving people chances, in trying to make them better. He confronted Nicholas privately and told him he'd help him become stronger. There was also a man named Pete Anderson, a surgeon and the only doctor in Alexandria. Pete was also an abusive drunk who beat his wife Jessie and terrorized his sons Ron and Sam. Rick saw the bruises and recognized the situation immediately. He confronted Pete, then Jesse, and tried to intervene. It escalated into a street fight. Rick, wild-eyed and blood-spattered, pulled a gun in the middle of the neighborhood and gave a speech about how the Alexandrians didn't know what it took to survive. Michonne knocked him unconscious to shut him up. At a community meeting to decide Rick's fate, Pete showed up drunk with a knife and accidentally killed Deanna's husband, Reg. Deanna looked at Rick and said, "Do it." Rick shot Pete in the head. Standing right there, watching this happen, was Morgan Jones. Morgan had finally arrived. He'd been tracking Rick for a long time, following his trail from King County through the roads of Georgia and Virginia. But Morgan was different now. After Rick had last seen him, Morgan had gone through a profound transformation. He'd met a man named Eastman, a forensic psychiatrist living alone in a cabin, who taught him Aikido and a philosophy of nonviolence. "All life is precious," Eastman told him. Morgan embraced this completely. He carried a staff instead of a gun. He tried to redirect rather than kill. He believed that anyone could change. This put Morgan on an immediate collision course with Rick, who had been moving in the opposite direction. Rick had become harder, more willing to kill preemptively, more certain that threats needed to be eliminated before they could grow. Morgan and Rick's philosophical conflict, whether mercy or ruthlessness was the right approach to survival, would run through the show for years. But Alexandria's biggest test came not from within, but from outside. Two threats hit almost simultaneously. First, a group called the Wolves attacked. They were a cult-like band of scavengers who carved W's into their foreheads and killed without reason or remorse. They slaughtered their way into Alexandria while most of the fighters were out on a mission to redirect a massive walker herd away from the community. Carol, still in her housewife disguise, grabbed a gun and started picking off wolves one by one. Morgan tried to let some of them go, refusing to kill. They clashed over it. The second threat was the herd itself. A quarry full of thousands of walkers had been building up for months, held in place by trucks that were starting to slip. Rick organized a massive operation to redirect the herd away from Alexandria, using cars, runners, and roadblocks to guide them on a 20-mile detour. It was working beautifully until a horn blared from Alexandria during the wolves' attack, drawing half the herd straight toward the community walls. The walls held, barely, but then part of a watchtower collapsed and took a section of wall with it, and walkers poured into the streets. The group fought desperately to survive in their own neighborhood. During the chaos, Jessie and her two boys, Ron and Sam, were killed. Sam froze in the middle of a crowd of walkers and was devoured. Jessie screamed, attracting more. She was pulled down too, but she was gripping Carl's hand so tightly that Rick had to hack her arm off with a machete to free his son. Ron, seeing his mother die, turned a gun on Rick. Michonne stabbed Ron from behind, but his gun went off and hit Carl in the eye. Rick carried his son to the infirmary and then walked back outside alone with his machete and started killing walkers, one by one, silently, relentlessly. And then something remarkable happened. The Alexandrians, the soft people who'd never fought, picked up weapons and followed him. They fought side by side for the first time. Daryl drove a fuel truck into the pond and lit it on fire, creating a wall of flame that drove the walkers back. By morning, the herd was destroyed. Alexandria was saved. Carl survived, though he lost his right eye. The experience bonded the Alexandrians and Rick's group into something closer to one community. They rebuilt the walls. They organized defense teams. Rick and Michonne finally got together, something that had been building for years, a quiet recognition that they'd been partners in every way that mattered. And then a man named Paul Rovia, who went by Jesus, showed up from a nearby community called the Hilltop. Jesus told them about a network of communities that existed in the area. The Hilltop, led by a man named Gregory, grew crops and raised livestock. The Kingdom, led by a charismatic man named Ezekiel, who kept a pet tiger named Shiva, operated out of a converted school. There was even a coastal community called Oceanside, but all of these communities had something in common. They were all under the thumb of a group called the Saviors, and their leader was a man named Negan. The Saviors operated a protection racket. They showed up at your gates with overwhelming numbers and told you that half of everything you produced now belonged to them. If you cooperated, they let you live. If you resisted, they made an example of you. They'd already killed a teenager from the hilltop named Rory by beating him to death with a baseball bat. The hilltop was compliant, but they were desperate. Rick made a deal with the hilltop. His group would take out the Saviors. In exchange, the hilltop would share food and supplies. Rick's group attacked a Savior outpost at night, killing dozens of them in their sleep. It was brutal, calculated, and morally complicated. Glenn killed a man for the first time that night, stabbing sleeping Saviors in their beds. It changed him. You could see it in his face, but the Saviors were bigger than Rick realized. Much, much bigger. And his preemptive strike didn't end the threat, it provoked it. The Saviors retaliated by capturing members of Rick's group, one by one. Daryl was shot, Eugene was taken, and eventually, Rick's entire inner circle was cornered on a road at night, forced to their knees in a clearing in the woods, surrounded by dozens of armed Saviors. And that's when Negan stepped out of an RV with a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire. He'd named it Lucille after his dead wife. And he was smiling. Negan was unlike any villain the show had produced. He was charming, funny, theatrical, and absolutely terrifying. He spoke in long, meandering monologues, laced with profanity and dark humour. He had rules, he had a code, and his code was simple. You work for me now, you produce for me. And if you step out of line, I will kill someone you love. He lined up Rick's group. Rick, Carl, Michonne, Daryl, Glenn, Maggie, Abraham, Sasha, Aaron, Rosita, and Eugene. All on their knees, all helpless. Negan walked down the line swinging Lucille and reciting Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo. He chose Abraham, a massive, fearless, red-headed soldier who had survived everything the apocalypse had thrown at him. Abraham looked up at Negan and said, "Suck my nuts." Negan brought Lucille down on his head. Again, and again, and again, Abraham was gone. Then Daryl did something. He was so consumed with rage that he jumped up and punched Negan in the face. Negan didn't kill Daryl. That wasn't how his system worked. Instead, he punished the group. He turned to Glenn and said back to it, Glenn's death was the hardest thing the show ever asked its audience to watch. The blows caved in his skull. One of his eyes bulged out. And still somehow, Glenn managed to look at Maggie and say his final words. "Maggie, I'll find you." The lineup scene aired as the Season 7 premiere in October 2016. Over 17 million people watched it. Viewers were genuinely traumatized. People stopped watching the show. Others called it the greatest and worst episode of television they'd ever seen. It was devastating because Glenn had been there from the beginning. He was the voice on the radio who saved Rick in that tank in Atlanta. He was the moral heart of the group, and he died on his knees in the dirt because Daryl threw a punch. What followed was a season of subjugation. Negan took half of everything Alexandria had. He showed up whenever he pleased, walked through their houses, and took whatever caught his eye. He imprisoned Daryl at his compound, the Sanctuary, and tortured him psychologically, playing a song called Easy Street on repeat at maximum volume, feeding him dog food sandwiches, and trying to break him into becoming a loyal soldier. Daryl never broke. Rick was broken, though. For the first time in the series, Rick was genuinely afraid. Not of walkers, not of starvation, but of Negan. He complied. He gathered supplies. He swallowed his pride. He did whatever Negan asked because every time he even thought about resistance, he pictured Glenn's face. But quietly, in the background, the resistance was forming. Maggie went to the hilltop and started building alliances. Rick eventually reconnected with his own sense of purpose. He found the kingdom and convinced Ezekiel to join the fight. He even made a deal with a junkyard community led by a strange woman named Jadis, though that alliance would prove unreliable. The war with the Saviors lasted roughly 2 weeks of in-universe time, even though it stretched across all of Season 7 and Season 8 of the show. There were battles at Alexandria, at the hilltop, at the sanctuary. Sasha sacrificed herself by taking poison before Negan could use her as a weapon, reanimating inside a coffin and attacking Negan when the lid was opened. Jadis betrayed Rick and turned her guns on Alexandria during a crucial battle. Carl discovered a massive Savior outpost and realized the scale of what they were dealing with. And then Carl was bitten. Not during some grand battle. Not during a heroic rescue. He was bitten while helping a stranger named Siddiq in the woods. A single walker. A single bite on his torso. And just like that, Carl Grimes, Rick's son, the boy who had been at the centre of this story since episode 1, was going to die. Carl spent his last hours writing letters. One to Rick, one to Michonne, one to Negan. In his letter to Negan, Carl asked him to stop. He asked for peace. He told Negan that there had to be a way to end this without more killing. Carl's last wish was a world where his father and Negan could find a way to coexist. Carl died in the basement of a burned-out church with Rick and Michonne at his side. He shot himself to prevent reanimation. Rick was destroyed. Michonne was destroyed. Michonne. The audience was destroyed. Carl had been the future. He was supposed to inherit whatever world they built. And now he was gone. The final battle came to a head in a field. Rick and Negan faced each other. Negan swung Lucille. Rick dodged. And then Rick slashed Negan's throat with a piece of glass. Negan fell, bleeding out. And Rick could have let him die right there. But he remembered Carl's letter. He remembered his son asking for mercy. Rick turned to Siddiq and said, "Save him." The crowd was stunned. Maggie screamed. She wanted Negan dead for what he'd done to Glenn. But Rick insisted. Negan would live, but he would spend the rest of his life in a cell. He would watch them build a world, Carl's world, from behind bars. Negan was imprisoned. The Saviors surrendered. The communities began rebuilding. And for the first time, in what felt like forever, the guns went silent. But the cost, Abraham, Glenn, Carl, Sasha, so many others, the price of victory was staggering. And the peace that followed would be fragile, complicated, and tested in ways nobody could have predicted. There's something Negan's backstory tells us that makes his character more understandable, even if it doesn't make him forgivable. Before the outbreak, Negan was a high school gym teacher. His wife Lucille had cancer. He cheated on her during her treatment. When the outbreak hit, Lucille's medication couldn't be maintained. On March 28, 2011, about 7 months into the apocalypse, Negan forgot to turn on the generator that powered the refrigerator storing her chemo drugs. They were ruined. Lucille, knowing she was a burden and that Negan needed to survive without her, took her own life. She died so Negan could live. And the guilt of that, the grief, the self-loathing, it turned him into the monster we met in that clearing. The bat was named after her. Everything he became was built on the ruins of who he'd been and who he'd lost. That's what The Walking Dead does at its best. It doesn't give you simple villains. It gives you broken people making broken choices in a broken world. And then it asks you to decide how you feel about all of it. After the war with the Saviors ended, a time jump of about 18 months moved the story forward. By now it was roughly early 2014 in the show's timeline, nearly 4 years since the outbreak. The communities were cooperating. Alexandria, the Hilltop, the Kingdom, Oceanside, and even the former Saviors at the Sanctuary were all linked by a network of trade routes and shared labour. They were building a bridge, literally and figuratively, to connect these settlements and make travel between them safer. Rick was leading the effort. He was older, greyer, and carrying the weight of everything that had happened. Michonne was at his side. Judith was growing up, and Negan sat in his cell, day after day, talking to himself and the occasional visitor. But the peace was fragile. The former saviors resented being treated as second-class citizens. Some of the hilltop residents didn't want to work alongside people who terrorized them. Old grudges simmered, and a group of savior dissenters were quietly sabotaging the bridge project, destroying supplies and causing problems. Maggie was running the hilltop now, and she was doing it well, but she still hadn't forgiven Rick for sparing Negan. She went to Alexandria one night with a crowbar, intending to go into that cell and finish what Rick wouldn't. Michonne stopped her at the door. They argued. And then Maggie went down to the cell and looked at Negan. He was pathetic, broken, crying. He told her he deserved death. And something in Maggie shifted. Killing him wouldn't bring Glenn back. It wouldn't fix anything. She left him alive. Then came the day that changed everything. Rick was leading a herd of walkers away from the communities when his horse was spooked by a second herd, converging from a different direction. Rick was thrown from the horse and landed on a slab of concrete, impaled through his side on a piece of steel rebar. What followed was one of the most surreal and emotional episodes in the series. Rick, delirious from blood loss, pulled himself off the rebar using his belt and somehow climbed back on his horse. As he drifted in and out of consciousness, he hallucinated conversations with people he'd lost. He saw Shane in their old police cruiser, eating burgers like old times. Shane told him to find his rage and get it done. He saw Herschel on the farm, peaceful and warm. Herschel told him he didn't need to have all the answers. He saw Sasha, who asked him what his wound really was. Rick led the herd to the bridge. The dynamite was still rigged from the construction project. Rick's people arrived at the far side and saw what he was about to do. Michonne screamed. Daryl fired arrows to try to thin the herd, but there were too many. Rick raised his gun, aimed at the dynamite on the bridge, and fired. The bridge exploded. The herd was destroyed. And Rick was gone. Everyone believed he was dead. Michonne fell to her knees. Daryl stared at the burning wreckage. The communities mourned. A bridge over the river was renamed in Rick's honor. The group moved on, but Rick wasn't dead. He was pulled from the river downstream by Jadis, who had been communicating with a mysterious organization via helicopter. She radioed them and said she had someone to trade. The helicopter came. Rick, barely conscious, was loaded aboard and flown away. Where he went and who took him wouldn't be revealed for years. After Rick's disappearance, the show jumped forward 6 years to October 2020 in the timeline. 10 years into the apocalypse, everything had changed. Judith Grimes was now about 10 years old, wearing Rick's hat and carrying a katana. She was fierce, smart and compassionate, the best of both her parents. She had a younger brother named RJ, short for Rick Jr., who was born after Rick's disappearance. Michonne had been pregnant at the time and had never told Rick. Alexandria had grown and matured. Michonne was the de facto leader, but she'd pulled back from the other communities, becoming more insular and protective after Rick's loss. The bridge was never rebuilt. Contact between the settlements had weakened. Daryl had spent years in the woods, alone, searching for Rick. He'd never found him. New faces arrived. A group of survivors led by a woman named Magna, along with Yumiko, Connie, Luke and Kelly, were found by Judith and brought to Alexandria. They were capable people, each with their own skills, and they integrated into the community over time. But the real threat was already out there, moving among the herds. They called themselves the Whisperers. They were survivors who had abandoned civilization entirely and chosen to live among the walkers. They wore the skinned faces of the dead as masks, walked among the herds and used the walkers as both camouflage and weapon. Their leader was a woman who called herself Alpha. She shaved her head, spoke in a flat monotone, and ruled her people through fear and a twisted philosophy that civilization was weakness, and that humans needed to return to their animal nature. Her enforcer was a massive man called Beta, who stood over 6.5 feet tall and wore a walker skin mask that he never removed. Alpha had a daughter named Lydia, a teenager who had been raised in this environment and knew nothing else. Lydia was captured by the hilltop and began to form a bond with the people there, especially a boy named Henry, Ezekiel, and Carol's adopted son. When Alpha came to retrieve Lydia, tensions escalated into a standoff. Alpha's response to being challenged was decisive and horrifying. She established a border between her territory and the communities by placing a line of severed heads on wooden pikes. Among those heads were several people the audience had come to know and care about. Henry was one of them. Tara, who had been with the group since the governor's second army, was another. Enid, a young woman who'd grown up in Alexandria, was there too. 10 heads in total, each one a message. Cross this line and you die. The discovery of the pikes broke something in the communities. Carol, who had lost Henry, was consumed by a silent, burning rage. Daryl, who had been close to Henry too, grieved alongside her. The mood shifted from cautious coexistence with the Whisperers to a slow-building fury that would eventually erupt into war. But before that war could be fought openly, Negan was set free. Or rather, he escaped. The details of how he got out varied by telling, but what mattered was what happened next. Negan walked out of Alexandria and into the wilderness, eventually making his way to the Whisperers. He knelt before Alpha, pledged his loyalty, and joined them. For weeks, it seemed like Negan had reverted to his old ways. He walked with the Whisperers, followed Alpha's rules, even killed a member of the hilltop during a skirmish. The communities were horrified. But Negan was playing a long game. He'd been working with Carol the entire time. Carol had secretly let Negan out of his cell. She'd given him a mission: infiltrate the Whisperers and kill Alpha. It was ruthless, calculated, and exactly the kind of move Carol had been making since the prison. She'd do whatever it took to protect her people, no matter how morally grey the method. Negan earned Alpha's trust. He got close to her, and then, in a quiet moment in the woods, he slit her throat. He brought Alpha's severed head to Carol on a pike and laid it at her feet. The look they exchanged said everything. This was always the plan. Beta took over the Whisperers and launched a massive assault, driving the largest walker herd the show had ever depicted toward the communities. The final battle with the Whisperers was chaotic and spread across multiple locations. Beta himself was killed by Daryl, who drove 2 knives into his eyes during a close-quarters fight inside the herd. When Beta's mask was pulled off, it was revealed he'd been a famous country singer before the apocalypse, which is a fun and slightly absurd detail that the show never spent too much time on. The Whisperers were finished. Their herd was scattered. Alpha was dead. Beta was dead. The survivors who'd followed them either surrendered or vanished into the wilderness, but the communities were battered. The hilltop had been burned to the ground during the war. Alexandria's walls were damaged. Resources were thin, and a new force was about to enter the picture, one that would look nothing like anything they'd encountered before. It started with a voice on the radio. Eugene, who had been broadcasting on a ham radio for months, made contact with a woman who called herself Stephanie. She was warm, funny, and educated. They talked for weeks, growing closer. Eventually, Eugene organised a small group to travel to a rendezvous point and meet her in person. The journey led them to a place called the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth was staggering. It was a network of settlements centred around a city of over 50,000 people that had been operating continuously since the early days of the outbreak. They had infrastructure, a government, a military headed by a man called Mercer. They had jobs, money, ice cream shops, bakeries, a functioning judicial system, and class stratification that mirrored the pre-apocalypse world. The wealthy lived in nice houses. The working class lived in modest apartments. There was a literal upper and lower class just like before. It was led by Governor Pamela Milton, a polished politician whose family had been prominent before the fall and who saw herself as the steward of civilization's last best hope. Her son, Sebastian, was entitled Reckless and Dangerous. He got people killed by sending them into walker-infested areas to retrieve cash from banks so he could maintain his lifestyle. He was the worst kind of privileged kid, only now his privilege existed in a world where people were dying to protect it. Darrell and several others from Alexandria eventually joined the Commonwealth, some voluntarily, some reluctantly. Darrell became a trooper. Carol worked behind the scenes, trying to navigate the political landscape. Ezekiel needed medical care that only the Commonwealth could provide. Maggie was offered an alliance but turned it down, suspicious of the Commonwealth's true motives. Lance Hornsby was the man behind the curtain, a smooth-talking political operator who was using the Commonwealth's resources to expand his personal power. He made deals with Alexandria and the Hilltop, offering aid in exchange for influence. When things didn't go his way, he turned to force. He orchestrated attacks on the communities and tried to seize control. The final season of the show played out this conflict between the Commonwealth's order and the freedom the communities had fought so hard to maintain. Eugene was put on trial for his involvement in the death of Sebastian Milton, which had happened during a confrontation where Sebastian was killed by a reanimated walker in front of a crowd. The trial became a flashpoint for public anger against the Milton regime. When a variant herd of walkers, faster and more aggressive than the standard kind, threatened to overwhelm the Commonwealth, Pamela Milton tried to sacrifice the lower-class district by sealing them outside the inner walls. It was naked, cold-blooded class warfare in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. The survivors from Alexandria, Hilltop, and the Commonwealth's own soldiers refused to let it happen. Mercer turned against Pamela. Darrell led the charge to open the gates and save everyone. Maggie, Negan, Carol, and the rest fought side by side one last time. They killed the variant walkers, saved the people, and Pamela Milton was deposed. In the aftermath, the Commonwealth was reformed. Ezekiel helped govern the new, more equitable version of the community. A railroad was rebuilt, connecting the settlements. A year passed in a time jump, and we saw what peace actually looked like. Children in schools, crops growing, people travelling between communities on trains. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. It was a world worth living in. Darrell packed up his motorcycle and left. He promised Judith he'd come back, and he told her that if he heard anything about Rick and Michonne out there, he'd find them and bring them home. Judith called him Uncle Darrell. They hugged. Carol told Darrell she loved him. He said it back. And then he rode out through the Commonwealth gates alone, heading into whatever came next. The show's final scene was 2 letters being written. Rick sitting on a riverbank in a CRM military jacket, writing to Michonne. Michonne sitting in a barn wearing a suit of armour she'd scavenged, writing to Judith. They were separated by hundreds of miles and years of captivity and searching, but they were both still going, still fighting, still believing they'd find each other. Rick put his letter in a bottle and threw it in the river. A helicopter appeared overhead. He was still a prisoner of the CRM. He threw his bag of belongings onto a beached boat, knowing it might never be found. And then he surrendered, because that was the game he was playing. Survive, endure, wait. Michonne charged toward a massive herd on horseback, katana raised. And then the final words of the series played over a montage of faces, past and present, living and dead. The words Rick had said to Michonne, the words Judith repeated to her brother. We're the ones who live. That was the end of the main series, 11 seasons, 177 episodes. From a man waking up in an empty hospital to a community building a railroad. From Don't Open Dead Inside to We're the Ones Who Live. The scope of the journey is hard to fully appreciate until you sit back and look at all of it at once, which is exactly what we've been doing tonight. But the story didn't end there, because 3 spin-off shows would pick up the loose threads and carry them forward into new territory. And each of them had something to say about what comes after the end. The first spin-off to premiere was Dead City, which followed Maggie and Negan to Manhattan. Now, if there are 2 people in the Walking Dead universe who should never be forced to work together, it's the woman whose husband was beaten to death with a baseball bat and the man who swung it. But that's exactly what happened. A few years after the main series ended, Maggie was back at the hilltop, quietly running things, when a group of raiders attacked. They stole her grain, but more importantly, they took a hostage, her son Herschel, now a teenager named after his grandfather. The raiders were led by a man called the Croat, who used to be one of Negan's lieutenants back during the Savior days. The Croat was exceptionally unhinged even by Savior standards, and Negan had apparently been the one person who could handle him. The Croat had taken Herschel to Manhattan and set up shop there. This is where things get interesting, because Manhattan in the Walking Dead universe is essentially a sealed-off death trap. Early in the outbreak, the military destroyed all the bridges and tunnels hoping to contain the walkers. Instead, they sealed 1.5 million people inside with the dead. The island became one of the epicenters of the collapse. Nobody went in. Nobody came out. Maggie tracked Negan down. He'd been living under a fake identity in a small town, laying low, trying to disappear. He had a young mute girl named Ginny with him, a child he'd taken under his protection. Maggie told him what happened and essentially forced him to come along by pointing out that Negan was the only person who knew how the Croat thought and might be able to talk him down or outmaneuver him. Their relationship through Dead City was something to watch. They'd be cooperating one moment and at each other's throats the next. Maggie still carried the weight of Glenn's death every single day, and being around Negan was a constant reminder. Negan understood this. He didn't make excuses. At one point he told Maggie straight up that no matter how many apologies he offered or excuses he gave, she couldn't get over what he did, and she shouldn't. That's maybe the most honest thing Negan ever said. They crossed into Manhattan by boat and found a nightmarish landscape, ruined skyscrapers, walker-infested streets, and pockets of survivors who had adapted to the island in wildly different ways. There was a community of tribespeople living in the underground tunnels and basements, led by survivors who'd been there since the beginning. A man named Tommaso described what the early days were like. Bodies coming up from the ground, falling from the sky. They kept waiting for the army to save them, and when the army finally came, they just blew up the bridges and left everyone to die. The Croat had set up his base in Madison Square Garden, surrounded by a massive herd he'd been gathering from across the city. He led a group called the Barazi, and he operated under the influence of a mysterious figure called the Dharma, a former New York theatre critic who had become something like a cultural dictator on the island. She ran things from behind the scenes, directing the Croat and his people like performers in a play she was writing. In the second season, things escalated further. Ginny, the girl Negan had been protecting, snuck to Manhattan on her own. She got hurt, infected. Negan was desperate to save her, retrieving medical equipment from an abandoned hospital, hooking her up to a ventilator, doing everything he could. But the infection was too far gone. Ginny died. Negan was devastated. He sat at her bedside and wept. Maggie found Herschel eventually. She rescued him. But the dynamic between mother and son was strained. Herschel was angry. He knew Negan had killed his father, and he couldn't understand why Maggie hadn't killed Negan when she had the chance. Maggie tried to explain that killing Negan wouldn't fix what was broken, that revenge wouldn't bring Glenn back. Herschel wasn't ready to hear it. Meanwhile, the New Babylon Federation, a governing body from the mainland, sent marshals to Manhattan. They were after the island's methane reserves, a valuable power source. a marshal named Pearlie Armstrong had a personal connection to Manhattan and complicated ties to Negan. The political dimensions of Dead City expanded the world in ways the main show rarely did, showing that beyond the immediate survival concerns, nations and governing bodies were forming, competing for resources and projecting power. By the end of Season 2, Negan was in a dark place. With Ginny dead and his back against the wall, he made a chilling declaration. He said he was done showing mercy. He was going to line them all up and kill them all. It was a deliberate echo of his saviour days, and it suggested that Negan's redemption arc might not have a clean ending after all. The Dharma survived a fire that should have killed her and captured Maggie in the season's final moments. Herschel, caught between his mother and the forces controlling Manhattan, was left in an impossible position. The story is still unfolding. The second spin-off took Daryl Dixon to the last place anyone expected, France. Specifically, the Normandy coast, where Daryl washed up on a beach with no memory of how he got there. He'd been put on a boat, though by whom and why wasn't immediately clear. All he knew was that he was thousands of miles from home, didn't speak the language, and was surrounded by walkers that were different from anything he'd seen before. This brings us back to the wildfire virus and its origins. Remember, the virus came from a French biomedical lab. After the outbreak, scientists at that same lab tried to create variant strains that would counteract the reanimation process. Instead, they made things worse. Their experiments produced mutated walkers. Some burned from the inside out but kept moving. Others were faster, more aggressive, capable of climbing and problem-solving in ways that regular walkers couldn't. France was ground zero for the virus and for the worst of its mutations. Daryl found himself taken in by a group of nuns at an abbey in the French countryside. They were protecting a boy named Laurent, who was possibly the most unusual child in the Walking Dead universe. Laurent's mother had been bitten while pregnant. She died and reanimated, but somehow the baby survived the birth. Born from a walker, essentially. The nuns and a larger group called the Union of Hope believed Laurent might be immune to the virus, possibly even the key to a cure. A rival faction, called the Power of the Living, led by a woman named Marion Genet, wanted to weaponize the walkers instead. Genet's forces created a terrifying variant called AMPers, mutant walkers, enhanced with a serum that made them nearly unstoppable killing machines. Daryl's journey through France was visually and tonally different from anything in the main show. Medieval abbeys, French countryside, the streets of Paris. He befriended a nun named Isabelle and slowly became Laurent's protector, though he resisted the responsibility at first. He didn't want to be someone's guardian angel. He wanted to find a way home. But that's always been Daryl's pattern. He says he doesn't care, then proves through his actions that he cares more than almost anyone. Carol eventually came to France looking for Daryl. She tracked his path across the ocean and arrived in time to help him fight Jenny's forces. The Season 2 finale saw Jenny defeated and the power of the living scattered, but the bigger questions about Laurent's immunity and the virus's future remained unresolved. Season 3 moved the action to Spain, with Daryl and others continuing their journey across post-apocalyptic Europe. The Walking Dead had always been an American story, set in the woods and suburbs of Georgia, the highways of Virginia, the streets of Atlanta and Washington. Seeing it through the lens of medieval European landscapes and ancient cities gave the franchise a completely different texture, and it reinforced something important about the virus. This wasn't just an American apocalypse. The whole world fell. Every country, every culture, every language. The dead don't care about borders, but the spin-off that everyone was waiting for was the ones who live. The story of what happened to Rick Grimes after that helicopter carried him away from the burning bridge. The answer was complicated and painful. Rick had been taken by the CRM, the Civic Republic military. The CRM was the armed force of the Civic Republic, a city of over 200,000 people located near Philadelphia. It was the largest known surviving civilization in North America, and possibly the world. They had infrastructure, agriculture, industry, and a military that projected power far beyond their borders. The CRM operated in extreme secrecy. Their citizens didn't know where the city was located. Their soldiers were tethered to handlers, and their leadership, particularly a man named Major General Beale, operated with a philosophy that was terrifying in its logic. The world was dying. The herds were growing. Communities that formed independently were competition for resources, and competition, in Beale's view, needed to be eliminated. The CRM had destroyed the community of Omaha and its campus colony. They monitored and infiltrated other settlements. They ran test subjects through labs, and they had taken Rick because he was valuable, strong, capable, a natural leader. They wanted to use him. Rick spent years trying to escape. During one attempt, he did something that showed just how desperate he was. He was tethered to a CRM soldier by a cable attached to his wrist. Walkers were closing in. The soldier wouldn't release him. So Rick fashioned a tourniquet from his belt and cut off his own hand with a hatchet to slip the tether. He got away briefly, only to be recaptured. After that, something broke in Rick. He stopped trying to escape. He was assigned to a man named Lieutenant Colonel Okafor, who believed the CRM could be reformed from within. Okafor wanted Rick to rise through the ranks and eventually change the system. Rick, with nothing left to lose, accepted. He gave himself over to the mission. He burned his letters to Michonne. He stopped looking toward home, and then Michonne found him. Michonne had left Alexandria to search for Rick after finding his belongings, his boots, and some carved iPhones washed up on Bloodsworth Island. She'd been searching for months, following clues, surviving on her own, until she infiltrated the CRM's consignee program using a fake identity. She worked her way into the system and eventually found Rick. Their reunion was a complicated thing. Rick was not the same man. He was gaunt, haunted, missing a hand, and deeply embedded in the CRM's structure. He told Michonne she needed to leave. He said the CRM was too powerful, that if they tried to escape together, everyone back home would be killed. A woman named Jadis, who had become a senior figure in the CRM, had explicitly threatened to have Alexandria destroyed if Rick tried to leave. Michonne was furious. She told Rick about their son, RJ. She told him Judith was still wearing his hat. She told him that she'd left their children to find him, and she wasn't going back without him. The argument between them in that episode was raw and painful. Two people who loved each other more than anything, fighting about what love actually requires. Rick tried to push Michonne away because he believed staying in the CRM was the only way to protect his family. Michonne refused to accept that. She told Rick that the only time she felt safe was when she was with him, and slowly, through the course of the series, she pulled him back from the edge. The turning point came when Rick was promoted high enough to meet Major General Beale personally. Beale revealed the CRM's true plan. In 18 hours, they were going to gas and destroy the city of Portland, the last remaining partner in their alliance. After Portland was gone, the CRM would declare martial law over the Civic Republic, dissolve the Civilian Council, and begin systematically eliminating any community that could pose a threat to their supremacy. It was genocide dressed up as strategic necessity. Rick was horrified. He'd been working within the system, believing he could change it from the inside, and now he was sitting across from the man who was about to murder hundreds of thousands of people to consolidate power. Rick drew a hidden knife and killed Beale. Rick and Michonne fought their way out together. They exposed the CRM's atrocities to the Civic Republic's civilian population. The people were shocked. They had no idea what their military had been doing in their name. The Civic Republic Council voted unanimously to take emergency oversight of the CRM. Free movement was established. Citizens could leave. The city would welcome newcomers. the military's mission shifted from domination to humanitarian assistance. Rick and Michonne went home. After years of separation, after everything the CRM had done to keep them apart, they walked out of the Civic Republic together and headed back to their children. Back to Alexandria. Back to the world they'd helped build. It was the emotional closure the franchise needed. Rick Grimes, the man who woke up alone in a hospital at the end of the world, finally got to go home. Now that we've walked through the entire timeline, I think it's worth slowing down and talking about the people at the center of it. Because the thing that kept The Walking Dead going for over a decade wasn't the walkers, or the action sequences, or the jump scares. It was the characters. The people you rooted for, cried for, screamed at through the screen. So let's spend some time with them. Rick Grimes is the spine of this whole story. When we met him, he was a man defined by duty, a sheriff's deputy, a husband, a father. He did things by the book. He believed in right and wrong. And then the world ended and the book got thrown out. And we watched Rick rewrite it in real time. His arc is essentially a story about what happens to a good man in an impossible world. He starts as someone who tries to save everyone. He negotiates with Herschel about the barn. He handcuffs Merle instead of killing him. He gives speeches about how they can still choose who they want to be. And then, piece by piece, the world takes that idealism and grinds it down. He kills Shane. He bites a man's throat out to save Carl. He massacres the Terminus survivors in a church. He executes Pete Anderson in the street. By the time Negan shows up, Rick has become someone the first season version of himself wouldn't recognize. And Negan breaks him even further, reducing him to a compliant servant too afraid to look up from the ground. But then Rick builds himself back up. Again. He fights the saviors. He wins. And at the moment of ultimate power, standing over Negan with a weapon in his hand, he chooses mercy. Not because he's naive, not because he's forgotten what Negan did, but because his dead son asked him to. That's Rick's story. Fall and rise, over and over. And every time he gets back up, he's carrying more weight. By the time of The Ones Who Live, Rick is a man who has literally cut off his own hand trying to get home, who has burned his letters and abandoned hope, and who still, when it matters most, finds the strength to kill a tyrant and save a city of 200,000 people. He goes home. He earns it. And maybe for the first time he gets to rest. Carol Pelletier might have the most dramatic transformation in the entire franchise. When we met her in season 1, she was a meek, abused woman, living in her husband's shadow. Ed beat her. He controlled her. She flinched when people raised their voices. And then Ed died, and Carol started becoming someone else entirely. It was slow at first. She learned to shoot. She started speaking up. When Sophia died, something hardened inside Carol that never fully softened again. She began making decisions that other people couldn't stomach, killing Karen and David at the prison to stop the plague, teaching kids to use knives when the other adults weren't looking, threatening a child, Sam Anderson, to keep a secret about the guns she was stockpiling in Alexandria. Carol single-handedly destroyed Terminus. She walked into a fortified compound covered in walker guts, blew up the fences, and rescued everyone. She infiltrated Alexandria as a harmless cookie-baking housewife while secretly being the most dangerous person in the room. She orchestrated Alpha's assassination by releasing Negan from his cell and sending him undercover. Every major turning point in the series, Carol was there, pulling strings that nobody else was willing to pull. But it cost her. Every hard choice took a piece. By the later seasons, Carol was haunted. She saw the ghosts of the people she'd killed and the people she couldn't save. Henry's death on Alpha's Pike nearly destroyed her. She pushed everyone away, including Daryl, the one person she never truly let go of. Carol's relationship with Daryl is one of the most beautiful things in the show, and it works precisely because it defies easy categorization. They never became a romantic couple, at least not in the traditional sense. What they had was deeper than that. It was two broken people who recognized each other's damage and chose to stay close anyway. They argued. They disappointed each other. They went months without speaking. But at the end of the series, when Daryl told Carol he loved her and Carol said it back, it felt like the truest thing either of them had ever said. Daryl himself went from a sidekick to the soul of the franchise. He wasn't even in the comic books. The character was created specifically for the show, tailored to Norman Reedus's particular blend of intensity and vulnerability. Daryl started as Merle's angry little brother, a redneck outsider who didn't trust anyone and didn't want to be trusted. He grunted more than he spoke. He hunted alone. He slept on the periphery of camp, not quite part of the group, but not willing to leave either. But over 11 seasons, Daryl became the person everyone else relied on. He searched for Sophia when others gave up. He carried Beth out of Grady Memorial. He resisted Negan's torture at the sanctuary. He killed Beta. He held the group together after Rick disappeared. By the end, Daryl wasn't just part of the family. He was its protector, its conscience, and its heart. What makes Daryl work as a character is that he never stopped being uncomfortable with love. He didn't know how to accept it. His childhood taught him that people who were supposed to care about you would hurt you instead. His father beat him so badly that Daryl carried the scars on his back into adulthood. Merle abandoned him repeatedly. Every relationship Daryl formed in the apocalypse was a risk, and every time he let someone in, the world found a way to take them away. Beth, Merle, Rick, Glenn. Still, he kept caring, he kept trying, and by the end of the show, he'd surrounded himself with more family than he'd ever had in his life, and then voluntarily left them to go searching for the ones who were still missing. That's who Daryl is, the guy who leaves, not because he doesn't love them, but because love won't let him stop looking. Maggie's story is, at its core, about survival through grief. She lost her father Herschel to the governor's blade. She lost her husband Glenn to Negan's bat. She lost her home at the hilltop when the Whisperers burned it. She lost her sister Beth at Grady Memorial. Every person Maggie loved, the world took from her. And yet she kept building. She kept leading. She raised her son in a community she helped create and defended it against every threat that came. Her relationship with Negan in Dead City is the show's most complicated emotional landscape. She needed him. She hated needing him. And Negan, to his credit, never pretended that what he'd done to Glenn was anything other than monstrous. He told Maggie to her face that she shouldn't forgive him, that she couldn't, and that was right. The Walking Dead didn't try to redeem Negan through Maggie's forgiveness. It redeemed him through his willingness to acknowledge that some things can't be redeemed. That's a much harder and more honest story to tell. Glenn Rhee was the show's moral compass. From the moment he saved Rick in Atlanta with a wisecrack over a radio, Glenn was the character who reminded everyone that decency was still possible. He was brave without being reckless. He was kind without being naive. He spared Nicholas when Nicholas tried to kill him. He went on every dangerous mission without complaint. He fell in love with Maggie at the worst possible time and built a life with her anyway. His death was the show's most devastating moment precisely because Glenn was irreplaceable. You can find another fighter, you can find another leader, but you can't replace the person who keeps the group's moral center intact. After Glenn died, the show lost something it never fully recovered. A lightness, a belief that good people could stay good. The remaining characters carried Glenn's absence like a phantom limb, always reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. Michonne was a warrior in the truest sense. When she appeared with her katana and her two pet walkers, she looked like she'd been carved out of the apocalypse itself. But underneath that armor was a woman who had lost her son, Andre, and her boyfriend, Mike, who had watched the people she loved die and responded by sealing herself off from human connection entirely. Her journey was about letting those walls down, first with Andrea, then with Rick, then with Carl and Judith. Michonne became Rick's partner in every way. His co-leader, his conscience, the person who could look at him when he was at his worst and pull him back. When Rick disappeared, Michonne ran Alexandria for 6 years and raised 2 children on her own. When she found evidence he was alive, she left everything to find him. And when she did find him, she fought a military superpower to bring him home. Herschel Green was the moral authority of the early seasons. A veterinarian turned reluctant prophet. Herschel lost his farm, his wife, and his leg, and somehow became more compassionate with each loss. His death at the governor's hands was devastating because Herschel represented the possibility that you could survive the apocalypse without losing your humanity. The governor killed him precisely because that possibility was dangerous to people who had already given theirs up. Abraham Ford was built like a tank and talked like a drill sergeant, but his toughest moments were always internal. He lost his family when his wife fled with their children after seeing him murder the men who had attacked them. She was more afraid of Abraham than of the walkers. That rejection from the people he loved most nearly broke him. He found purpose in Eugene's lie about a cure, and when that lie collapsed, he had to find a reason to live that wasn't saving the world. He found it in Sasha, in the group, in the simple act of getting up each morning and doing something useful. His last words, "Suck my nuts," were so perfectly Abraham that even in death he refused to let Negan have the satisfaction of seeing him afraid. And then there's Negan, the villain who became something else. Before the outbreak, he was just a guy, not a great guy. He cheated on his wife. He was selfish. He was lazy, but he wasn't a monster. The apocalypse made him one. Losing Lucille, being alone, building the sanctuary on a foundation of fear and violence. By the time we met him, Negan had convinced himself that cruelty was leadership and control was safety. His time in the cell changed him. Or maybe it didn't change him so much as force him to sit with who he was without the bat and the leather jacket and the army of followers. He talked to himself. He talked to his dead wife. He confronted the choices he'd made without anyone to perform for. When he was released to infiltrate the Whisperers, he did something genuinely brave. And when Alpha was dead and the war was over, he didn't try to rebuild the Saviors. He tried to disappear, to become nobody. Because maybe the best thing Negan could do for the world was stop being Negan. Dead City complicated that by putting him back in a leadership position, surrounded by violence, with people looking to him for direction. His declaration at the end of Season 2 that he was done showing mercy echoed his Saviour-era philosophy, and the question of whether Negan can truly change, or whether he'll always revert under pressure, is one the franchise hasn't answered yet. I honestly don't know which way it'll go, and I think that uncertainty is the point. There are so many other characters worth talking about. Dale, the moral conscience of the early group, who died trying to protect a prisoner's right to live. Tyrese, the gentle giant who could kill walkers with his bare hands but couldn't stop crying over the people he lost. Bob, the optimist who asked Rick to look at baby Judith and tell him the world wasn't going to change. Sasha, who chose to die on her own terms rather than be used as a weapon. Father Gabriel, who started as the most cowardly man alive and ended as someone willing to die for his friends. And the children. Carl, who grew up with a gun in his hand and somehow never stopped believing in mercy. Judith, who inherited the best of both her parents and carried Rick's hat and Michonne's sword into a future they built for her. Lizzie, who saw beauty in the dead and whose death at Carol's hand is still one of the hardest scenes the show ever produced. Enid, who wrote JSS on everything she touched. Just survive somehow, because sometimes that's all you can do. And Sam Anderson, who stood in a crowd of walkers calling for his mother and was torn apart because the world doesn't care if you're a child. It doesn't care if you're scared, it just keeps coming. The Walking Dead killed a lot of people, beloved characters, hated characters, Characters who deserved better, and characters who got exactly what was coming to them. But it never killed anyone, just for shock value, at least not at its best. Every death meant something. It changed the people who survived it. It shifted the story in a new direction. And it reminded you, over and over, that in a world without rules, the only things that matter are the choices you make and the people you make them for. Before we wind down for the night, I want to talk about something the show did that I think gets overlooked. The world building, not just the characters and the drama, but the actual world that was constructed over 13 years of storytelling across 7 different shows. When Rick woke up in that hospital, the world was empty. There was nothing. No government, no infrastructure, no communication, no law, just walkers and silence and the slow rot of everything that used to matter. But over the course of the franchise, we watched civilization rebuild itself from nothing. And the variety of what people built tells you everything about human nature. Alexandria was an attempt to recreate the suburbs, literally. Solar panels and book clubs and pasta makers. The people there wanted to pretend the apocalypse hadn't happened, and for a while, their walls were strong enough to let them. The hilltop was more agrarian, a farming community centered around a historic mansion, trading crops for security. The kingdom was theatrical and warm, run by a man who kept a tiger and spoke like a medieval king because he understood that in the apocalypse, people need symbols and stories as much as they need food and weapons. Oceanside was isolationist, a community of women and children who hid from the world because the world had taken all their men. The Sanctuary was a dictatorship built on fear. The Whisperers were a rejection of civilization entirely, a return to a primal pack-animal existence where the strong survived by blending with the dead. Terminus was a commune that turned to cannibalism. Woodbury was a benevolent facade hiding a dictator's paranoia. Each community was a different answer to the same question. What kind of world do we build now that the old one is gone? The Commonwealth might be the most interesting answer of all, because it tried to recreate the old world wholesale, including all its flaws. Class hierarchy, political corruption, economic inequality, a military-industrial complex that operated in secret and committed atrocities in the name of security. The Commonwealth was proof that you could rebuild civilization exactly as it was, and it would develop exactly the same problems, because the problems were never about the world, they were about people. And then there's the CRM, the Civic Republic Military, a force so powerful and so secretive that even its own citizens didn't know what it was doing. The CRM destroyed entire communities to eliminate competition. They ran experiments on human subjects. They planned to gas a city of civilians to consolidate power. Beale's logic was coldly rational. The world is dying. Resources are finite. Only the strongest civilization should survive. And we are the strongest. It's the kind of thinking that makes perfect sense on paper and produces monsters in practice. The virus itself is a fascinating piece of world building. The wildfire virus didn't just create zombies. It fundamentally changed the rules of life and death. Everyone carries it. Everyone will turn. A bite doesn't give you the virus, it gives you a secondary bacterial infection that kills you, and then the virus you already have brings you back. The only way to permanently die is to have your brain destroyed. This has enormous implications that the show explored in subtle ways. Burial practices changed. You couldn't just bury your loved ones anymore. You had to put them down first. The concept of a natural death disappeared. If you died in your sleep, peacefully, of old age, you would still get back up as a walker and attack the people sleeping next to you. Herschel's refusal to accept this at his farm was the emotional core of Season 2. The governor's inability to let go of his daughter was the engine of his madness. Every funeral, every quiet death in the background was shadowed by the knowledge that the body would need to be dealt with. The variants that emerged in France added another layer. Regular walkers were slow, mindless, driven by basic impulse. But the variants that French scientists accidentally created through their attempts at a cure were something else. Burners leaked acid. Climbers could scale walls. Ampers were engineered killing machines that could tear through a herd of regular walkers to get at the living. The implication was clear. Humanity hadn't just created the virus. Through our attempts to fix it, we made it worse. That's a very Walking Dead kind of irony. The show also quietly explored how different cultures and regions experienced the apocalypse. In America, the response was militaristic. Military cordons, evacuations, bases. When those failed, people scattered into small groups and fought for territory. In France, as we saw through Daryl Dixon, the response was more ideological. Two factions formed around different visions. The Union of Hope believed in finding a cure through Laurent, a miracle child born from the dead. The Power of the Living believed in weaponizing the dead to seize control. Both were responses to the same crisis, but they reflected different cultural approaches to catastrophe. Manhattan became its own sealed ecosystem. When the military blew the bridges, the island became a petri dish. The people trapped inside developed their own societies, their own power structures, their own legends. The Croat ruled through fear. The Dharma ruled through culture and manipulation. The tribespeople survived by hiding underground. All of this emerged organically from the specific geography and circumstances of one island. It's a level of world building that most zombie properties never attempt. One thing I've always found interesting is how the show handles time. The early seasons moved incredibly slowly. The first season covered only about 5 days. Season 2 was a few weeks. Season 4 was less than 2 weeks. The apocalypse felt immediate and relentless, like the characters could barely catch their breath between crises. But then the time jump started. 18 months between Season 8 and Season 9. 6 years in the middle of Season 9. The pace of the story began to match the pace of rebuilding. You can't show a community growing crops and establishing trade routes in real time. You have to skip ahead and show the results. The jumps were disorienting at first, but they allowed the show to tell a much bigger story than it could have otherwise. By the time the main series ended, roughly 12 to 13 years had passed since the outbreak. A generation had grown up in the apocalypse. Judith had never known the old world. R.J. had never known his father. The children of the Commonwealth had never seen an uninfected city. For them, walkers were just part of life, the way thunderstorms or traffic were part of ours. The show never quite explored what this generational shift meant as deeply as it could have, but the groundwork was there. What does it mean to build a future when the children building it have no memory of the past you're trying to restore? The Walking Dead also quietly asked some of the hardest ethical questions in modern storytelling, and it rarely gave clean answers. Is it acceptable to kill someone who might become a threat in the future? Rick said yes, Morgan said no. The show never told you who was right. Is it moral to sacrifice one person to save many? Shane said yes with Otis. Carol said yes with Karen and David. The show made you uncomfortable with both decisions. Should Negan have been executed or imprisoned? Maggie said executed. Rick said imprisoned. Carl said neither. Carl said find another way. And the show let all three positions exist without invalidating any of them. The line that always stuck with me was something Rick said early on. We are the Walking Dead. He wasn't talking about the walkers. He was talking about the living, about people who move through the world carrying their losses like dead weight, going through the motions of survival without really living. Daryl called him out on it at the time, said that ain't us. And in a way, the rest of the series was the group proving Daryl right. They weren't the Walking Dead. They were the ones who live. I think that's why the franchise resonated the way it did. Not because of the zombies, though the zombies were cool. Not because of the action, though the action was intense, but because it was, at its heart, a story about people trying to be good in a world that punished goodness. Trying to be kind when kindness could get you killed. Trying to build something beautiful on top of something terrible. And sometimes failing, and sometimes succeeding, and always getting back up. The Walking Dead premiered on October 31st, 2010. It ended on November 20th, 2022. In that time, it became one of the highest-rated cable television shows in history. At its peak, over 17 million viewers tuned in for a single episode. It launched careers, inspired countless imitators, and proved that a zombie story could be more than cheap thrills and gore. It could be literary, it could be philosophical, it could make you cry. The franchise continues. Dead City is telling its story in Manhattan. Daryl Dixon is crossing Europe. The ones who live brought Rick home. And somewhere out there in that fictional world, the wildfire virus is still in the air, still dormant in every living body, still waiting. The dead are still walking, but so are the living. And as long as they keep walking, the story keeps going. And honestly, after spending this much time with these characters and this world, I think that's the most comforting thing about The Walking Dead. It doesn't promise that things will be okay. It promises that people will try. That's enough. In this world and in theirs, that's enough. So that's it for tonight. The entire Walking Dead timeline, from Rick waking up in that hospital to Michonne charging a herd on horseback, from a virus born in a French lab to a community building a railroad in Virginia, from Don't Open Dead Inside to We're the Ones Who Live. 13 years of apocalypse, 7 shows, one deeply human story about what it means to survive and whether survival is worth anything without the people you love. In a future video, I'm planning to dive deeper into some of the stuff we only touched on tonight. The full lore of the wildfire virus and its variants. The complete Fear the Walking Dead timeline, which runs parallel to the main show and has its own sprawling story. The world beyond and what it revealed about the CRM before the ones who live picked up that thread. And maybe a deep dive into the communities and how each one reflected a different philosophy of survival. There's just so much in this universe that we could spend many more nights like this exploring it all. But for now, that's where we'll leave it. Thank you for spending the evening with me. I hope you enjoyed the journey, and I hope it helped you drift off to wherever you're going tonight. Stay safe out there, and sweet dreams. Actually, before I fully sign off, there are a few more things I want to cover. Some details and stories that didn't quite fit into the main timeline, but are too good to skip entirely. Think of this as the bonus material, the stuff you find in the appendix of a really good book. Let's talk about Eugene Porter for a second, because his arc might be the most underrated in the entire franchise. When we met him, he was a liar, a coward wearing a mullet who had convinced Abraham Ford that he was a government scientist with a cure for the Walker virus. The lie kept him alive because Abraham was willing to kill and die to protect the man who could save the world. When the truth came out, Abraham nearly beat Eugene to death. The group was furious, and Eugene had to figure out who he was without the lie that had defined him. The answer, it turned out, was someone far more valuable than he realized. Eugene was brilliant, not in the way he'd pretended, not as a virologist saving humanity, but as an engineer, a chemist, and a thinker who could solve practical problems that no one else could. He learned to make bullets from scratch at the sanctuary, which was critical during the war with the Saviors. He figured out communication systems. He repaired machinery. He became the person who kept the lights on, literally, in community after community. But more importantly, Eugene learned to be brave, not in the way Abraham was brave, charging into battle with fists swinging. Eugene's bravery was smaller and quieter. It was choosing to sabotage the bullets he'd made for Negan, so they'd backfire during the final battle, knowing it could get him killed. It was broadcasting on a ham radio for months, hoping someone would answer, and then travelling hundreds of miles to meet a stranger because he believed human connection was worth the risk. It was standing trial at the Commonwealth and telling the truth, even when it meant facing execution. Eugene's love story with Max, the woman he connected with over the radio, was sweet and awkward and painfully sincere. When he arrived at the Commonwealth and discovered the woman he'd been talking to wasn't actually named Stephanie, that it had been a setup to manipulate him, Eugene was crushed. But the real woman behind the voice eventually found him, and they built something genuine out of that deception. Eugene proposed in the most Eugene way possible, nervously and with too many words, and she said yes. In a show full of epic romances and tragic losses, Eugene and Max were a reminder that love doesn't have to be dramatic to be real. Sometimes it's just two weird people who found each other and decided not to let go. Then there's Morgan Jones, the first survivor Rick ever met, and the one whose story ran the longest. Morgan appeared in the pilot episode as a grieving father who couldn't shoot his dead wife. He disappeared for 2 full seasons, and when he came back in season 3, he was completely unhinged. His son Dwayne had been bitten and killed, and the grief had driven Morgan into a psychotic state. He'd booby-trapped an entire town, written mad scrawlings on the walls, and lost all sense of time and reality. Rick found him and tried to bring him back, but Morgan was too far gone. He told Rick to leave. Morgan eventually found his way back to sanity through Eastman, the man who taught him Aikido and the philosophy that all life is precious. He travelled to Alexandria, reconnected with Rick's group, and became one of the show's most fascinating moral voices. Morgan believed absolutely in the value of every human life. He refused to kill. He tried to rehabilitate enemies instead of eliminating them. This put him in constant conflict with Rick, Carol, and nearly everyone else, but Morgan held his ground. What makes Morgan interesting is that his pacifism wasn't naive. He'd been a killer. He'd been insane. He'd lost everything. His commitment to non-violence was a choice made with full knowledge of what violence looked like and what it did to the person wielding it. He wasn't saying don't kill because it's wrong in some abstract philosophical sense. He was saying don't kill because I've killed, and it destroyed me, and I don't want that for you. Morgan eventually left the main show and crossed over to Fear the Walking Dead, where his journey continued for several more seasons. He built communities, lost them, rebuilt them, and continued wrestling with the same fundamental question. Can you survive in this world without becoming a monster? I also want to mention the quiet heroes, the people who weren't main characters, but who made the story richer just by existing. Eastman, who taught Morgan the way of the staff, and who had once kidnapped and starved to death the man who killed his family, only to find that revenge had given him nothing but a longer nightmare. He told Morgan his story as a warning, and then a walker bit him, and Morgan had to put down the kindest man he'd ever met. Siddiq, the young man Carl was helping when he got bitten. Carl died saving Siddiq, and Siddiq spent the rest of his life carrying that weight. He became Alexandria's doctor. He delivered babies, he healed injuries, and he was murdered by a Whisperer spy who had infiltrated the community, a death that was tragic precisely because Siddiq had been trying so hard to honour Carl's sacrifice by being useful. Ezekiel, the former zookeeper, who adopted the persona of a medieval king to give his people something to believe in. He kept a tiger named Shiva, spoke in theatrical flourishes, and ran the kingdom with a combination of kindness and showmanship. When Shiva died saving Ezekiel from walkers, he dropped the act. He became just a man again, sick with cancer, watching his community crumble. But he rebuilt. He always rebuilt. By the end of the series, Ezekiel was helping govern the reformed Commonwealth, bringing his particular brand of hopeful idealism to a system that desperately needed it. And there's a moment I keep coming back to. It's small, and it's easy to miss. In one of the later seasons, Judith is sitting on the porch at Alexandria, and someone asks her about her dad. She tells them the story of the brave man. It's Rick's story, simplified into a bedtime tale for a little girl. The brave man who fought monsters and saved people and disappeared one day, but who she knows is still out there somewhere, still fighting, still trying to come home. RJ, Rick and Michonne's son, started calling himself Little Brave Man. He'd never met his father, had never seen his face except in photographs, and yet he'd built his entire sense of identity around a story about a man who loved his family so much that he gave up everything to protect them. That's the power of narrative in the Walking Dead universe. Stories aren't luxuries, they're survival tools. Ezekiel understood this with his king persona. The Commonwealth understood this with their propaganda. And Judith understood this with the brave man. The story of the brave man is essentially the story of the Walking Dead itself, distilled into its simplest form. Someone you love goes away. You don't know if they're coming back, but you tell the story anyway, because the telling keeps them alive, and keeping them alive keeps you going. 13 years. That's how long this story has been running in universe, over 15 years in real time since the show premiered. In that span, we watched Rick Grimes go from a man lying in a hospital bed to a man standing on a riverbank, writing love letters to his wife. We watched Daryl go from a nobody to the most loyal friend anyone could ask for. We watched Carol go from a victim to a warrior. We watched Maggie go from a farm girl to a leader. We watched Negan go from a monster to a man trying not to be one. The walkers were always just the weather, the wind and the rain and the cold that never stopped. You couldn't negotiate with them. You couldn't reason with them. You could only endure them. The real story was always about the living, what they built, what they destroyed, who they saved and who they lost and who they became. We're the ones who live. That line means something different every time you hear it. It's a statement of defiance, a declaration of purpose, a promise, a prayer. It's the thing you say when you're standing on the edge of the world and you choose, against all evidence and reason, to keep going. I think that's enough for tonight. I've talked for a long time, and I hope, wherever you are, that the sound of this story has carried you somewhere restful. The world of The Walking Dead is vast and dark and full of terrible things, but it's also full of people who refuse to give up on each other. And on nights like this, when the lights are low and the world is quiet, I think there's something comforting in that. So rest easy. The dead are walking, but the living are too. And as long as we're walking, we're still here. Good night.